Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of our Sharing is Caring podcast. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans un nouvel épisode de notre podcast Sharing is Caring. I am your blue host, and I'm delighted to see you again to share together, build stories and experiences that I hope will enrich your day. Before diving into the heart of our subject, I would like to thank you, dear listeners, for your loyalty. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. Your comments are valuable to us and encourage us to continue our adventure. Today, we have the honor of welcoming Alain, a passionate about nature and life, rural, which will immerse us in its universe, where harmonious coexistence with wildlife and flora is an everyday reality. Deep that unites man to his environment, and how this link manifests itself through practices such as hunting, fishing, and gathering. Alain will also tell us about his experience as a wildlife manager and the way he and his partner help to reconnect people to their true nature. This podcast is an invitation to rediscover simple pleasures of life, to rethink our relationship to consumption and nature, and to understand that the pursuit of happiness can sometimes take us back to the origins of our existence. So if you are ready to embark on an inspiring journey to the heart of the vie, Lozère, stay tuned and get ready to be amazed. Do not miss the next episodes of Sharing is Caring and to share this podcast. It's because of you that our community grows and we grow. We can continue to share these precious moments. Thank you again for being here. And now, space to our conversation with Alain. Well, hello, Alain. How are you? Well, I'm fine. I'm fine. Thank you for joining us on this podcast today. With pleasure. So where are you? So I live in the least populated department of France, the Lozère.
Dans le département le moins peuplé de France, c'est la Lozère.
76,000 inhabitants, you see. All inhabitants combined, so about 2 or 3 inhabitants. So it's a very, very natural department in the year. Department of livestock level of economic activity. That's it. So I live on the Aubrac, which is a conservation area as part of the Aubrac Regional Natural Park. Almost half of the department is a conservation area. 7 National Park on one side, and then the Regional Natural Park of the Aubrac, and in biosphere that brings together all the big bodies. It's internationally protected by UNESCO, so we still have a chance to live in a preserving nature with people who live in harmony with it. I'm retired. I'm 66 years old. My first job was as a seamstress.
Et que dire que mon métier au départ c'est la gestion de la faune sauvage.
I've been working since the late 70s at the office.
Dès la fin des années 70
National Hunting Office, which has since become the National Hunting and Wildlife Office, and I was in charge of research at the French Biodiversity Office. Applied to methods of monitoring and management of wildlife populations. Now I'm retired and I live with my wife, who's originally a librarian, but which has become available to manage today a rural cottage and guest houses. We've both chosen this life. It's a very special way of life, with advantages and disadvantages. When we live in the mountains, we live in a chui. So, obviously, there are problems of access to the. I would like to ask the Commissioner whether he is prepared to accept the amendments tabled by the Committee on the Environment, Public Health, and Consumer Protection, the chance and perhaps the privilege of living in the middle of nature. In any case, it's cool. You haven't left nature, you've worked your whole life, if I understand correctly, in nature and in the plural industry. I've never really been, well, I've had, like everybody else, times where I've had to live in the city, but it's been very brief. In fact, I need nature to live. I need nature to breathe. It's completely indispensable to me. Okay, so forgive me for being rude, but the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about the Cévennes is deer.
On parle des Cévennes, c'est les cerfs. C'est bien un endroit où on trouve des cerfs?
Do we find deer? Yes. So yes, there are deer in the Cévennes indeed. There is a large deer population in the Cévennes National Park. There are also deer on the Aubrac, a population that is exploding, where we have quite high densities and that are starting to cause problems in the forest and agricultural environment. So indeed, it is a management that must become more and more fine in order to coincide both with human activities and the presence of these animals that delight everyone. With the highest possible density, but still allowing human activities to thrive. It should be noted that there has been a study of the regional natural park that has been conducted for 4 years on the Aubrac. It is still quite considerable, so there is still acceptance by breeders and farmers. But there are limits which must not necessarily be exceeded. Still a delicate cohabitation between man and nature? No, I think that in fact, man is part of nature. So to say that man coexists with nature, in my opinion, man is part of nature. Today, it is true that we have a society that has since... There are people, you can forget this connection with nature, you can forget that they're part of it. Today, people who live in cities by choice or compulsion are often quite disconnected from these realities. And they perceive nature as a space for leisure, simply, whereas the purpose of man is to be part of that nature and to be an actor, in my opinion. I totally agree. I didn't say it right. You're totally right. No, not at all. That's clear. I totally agree with what you're saying. It was perhaps to introduce the next question, which was, how do we do when the greenhouse population explodes? When the wild boar population explodes, that's great news. If life is prosperous, everything is fine. And maybe it's because, yeah, how do we do it? I think you're a hunter. Can you tell us? Yes. I'm a hunter. I'm a hunter. And then, by profession, I'm a wildlife population manager. So simply, we already have to follow the populations in order to know as accurately as possible their levels. The quantities of animals present on a massif. Today, and I say this loud and clear, the principle that we often hear from people who are not familiar with the problems. To say that nature regulates itself is a utopia. It is a complete utopia. Man, humanity, has created imbalances in its development. And today, man, paradoxically, is forced to intervene to correct these imbalances. A population of greenhouses that grows too much on a forested massif is a forest that no longer regenerates. And in the long run, it means that the animal will endanger the very environment it inhabits. A little like us. A little like us, I say. We put everyone in danger. Absolutely. We can draw a parallel. Absolutely. Except for us, no one comes to correct behind. While the man has the opportunity, trying to keep your balance, doing the best you can. While nature, as many understand it, practically no longer exists on this planet. 80% of the planet is now man-made, that is, landscapes. Everything is modified by human activity, and humans are almost everywhere. So we'll never have, or very little territory where nature is able to regulate itself. Because the chains are broken, we hardly have any big predators left, and we have to. So I know it's not easy, you can't love. Hunting, and I understand that, and you might not like to kill an animal. Killing is actually a lot of other things, we can talk about that. Everything's going well, isn't it? Killing him is the purpose of an act of hunting, the act of pressing on thee. Relax those few seconds after days, weeks of searching, tracking an animal. And the choice of an animal, because man is ultimately the only predator that resonates. Personally, I'm a hunter who's growing more and more. It's the hunting approach, which is that I'm alone in the wild, and I'm watching a lot of animals. And I choose the animal that I'm going to take, that I'm going to kill. I take full responsibility for it. It's no coincidence I'm not going to shoot the first animal I meet. To give an idea, when I know that the deer is hunting on the approach, roughly, in a hunting season from June 1st to early September, I see 200 to 300 animals for. So the choice is going to be about the animal that's who is weak, who is sick, or who is almost full of life, who's not going to participate in reproduction. These are all things that a person who is not a hunting enthusiast finds difficult to understand. It's beautiful anyway. I hope I won't be assaulted for those words. But yes, the whole part before, you talked about hunting on the approach. I have the impression that you are close to the animals. You follow them, you know them a little bit. Can you maybe tell us more? How's the approach hunting going? The hunt is approaching. It requires us to regain our animality. That is to say, when the hunter approaches, he behaves exactly like a wild predator. He has to get close to the game, take into account the wind, take into account the noise, take into account its smell, which is very easily detectable by animals. A deer can smell you from 200 or 300 meters away. There is the part of animality that is in us, that is in all humans, that some have forgotten. We are redeveloping senses that seem to have completely disappeared. We can feel when we're being looked at by an animal or when we're being watched. I think it's a sense that we can find in this kind of hunting. You have to know a lot about the animal you're hunting. You have to know its habits. You have to know how it works, how it communicates. Knowing we're still learning every day, because nature is the one who says, I know her. And the child is the one who doesn't know her. In fact, new knowledge is brought to us every day. Incredible. I can only respect and approve of what you say. It's clear life, nature are infinite things. It's cool to be in your position and be able to appreciate that from the city. We don't really get a chance to see that. Obviously, we could, but it's less useful, we'll say. Yes, I know it is not easy. It still requires being involved all year round. I know. Personally, and with my wife, we are both very involved. Since we've made this choice of life, which is a life that is a little bit in opposition, with today's consumer society, to know that we live soberly. We're not decreasing. I don't like the term at all, but we live soberly. And we live to give an order of thought. We feed at the present time. It's about 80% of what nature gives us. by
Pour vous donner
hunting,
un ordre
by
d'idée,
fishing,
on se nourrit
by
à peu près
gathering,
à peu
by
près
trading with the
80% de
neighbors.
ce que la nature nous apporte.
This seems
Par la
unlikely for an
chasse,
urban
par la
person,
pêche, par la cueillette, par le troc avec
but
les
we can
voisins.
manage to feed on nature.
Voilà, ça paraît
We are 100%
invraisemblable pour un
involved.
urbain, mais
It's
on peut
nature
arriver à
that
être
feeds
bon dans la
us.
nature. Donc,
Our interest is to preserve it.
vous voyez, nous, on est impliqués
We're
à
preserving it as
100%.
much as possible.
C'est la nature qui
That's
nous
why I
nourrit,
levy
c'est
on
pas-
hunting or
Nous,
fishing.
notre intérêt, c'est de la préserver. On la
When you
préserve
go
au maximum.
fishing, if you catch a large
C'est pour ça qu'un
reproductive
prélèvement
fruit,
à la chasse,
we'll let her
pour la
go
pêche, hein, quand on va à la pêche, eh ben, si on,
because it's
on
necessary to
on
replenish the
capture
trout
cette
stream.
épice, on la relâche, quoi. Parce qu'elle est nécessaire
When we
pour
pick,
alimenter
we do it
le
intelligently.
ruisseau
You
du
don't
Puy.
pick it all at once.
Quand on fait de la cueillette,
We do it piece by
on le fait
piece
intelligemment.
in
On
order
recueille
to
pas,
preserve the resource.
cueille pas tout d'un coup, on le fait brin
That
par
is a
brin,
nice
de
word.
manière à préserver la
Clearly,
ressource.
in the city, we don't have that kind of relationship with nature.
C'est
It's
des
one of
belles
the
paroles,
angles that
hein.
we have a lot with
Clairement,
FarmNet.
voilà, à la ville, on a
One of the
pas ce
convictions I
rapport-là
also
à la
have,
nature.
it's
C'est
that
un
once we
exemple,
understand that
voilà,
it's
beaucoup
nature that
avec,
feeds us,
avec
I think we
FarmNet.
think
Une
differently.
conviction que j'ai également, c'est une
Yes,
fois qu'on
of
comprend
course.
que c'est la nature
It's
qui
a
nous nourrit,
philosophy that's a
je
little
pense qu'on
different
pense
from what's
différemment.
practiced elsewhere. But
Oui, tout à
Patricia
fait.
and
C'est
I,
une
we run a
philosophie
cottage and guest
un peu
rooms,
différente de ce qui se pratique ailleurs, mais
and we're trying to reconnect the
avec
people who
Patricia,
come to see us with this nature.
on gère un gîte et des chambres d'hôtes et on essaie
Our
de
slogan is rediscover your true nature.
reconnecter les gens qui viennent nous voir avec cette
That the
nature.
true nature of
Le
man
slogan, c'est
is respect for nature as well. Ah, yes, we are really
redécouvrir votre
aligned
vraie
then.
nature. Que la vraie nature de
So,
l'homme,
for
c'est le respect
example,
de la nature
I
aussi.
do weekends where I
Ah ouais, on
accompany
est
people
vraiment
to
en
the
ligne,
squares of Bram to make them discover the deer at the
Voilà,
time of
donc, par
reproduction,
exemple,
for example.
je fais
It's going very
week-ends
well.
où j'accompagne
We
les
have a
gens sur
lot
les
of
places de
people who
bord
are
pour leur faire
interested in
découvrir
rediscovering all
le
this.
cerf au moment de la
Weekends of
reproduction.
mushroom
Ça
discovery,
marche très
plant
bien.
discovery,
Beaucoup de gens qui sont intéressés
from cooking
pour
too,
redécouvrir tout ça.
relearning
Des
how to
week-ends de
eat
découverte des champignons,
healthily.
de découverte des plantes,
So,
de
since you're running a
cuisine,
cottage,
réapprendre
you're
à
in
se
touch
nourrir
with the people of the city.
sainement.
What's the biggest clash between city
Du
and
coup,
country people?
vu que tu gères un gîte, tu es en contact
What's
avec
the
les gens
thing
de la
that's
ville. C'est
you have
quoi
to clearly see
le plus grand
trends,
choc
things
entre
that people in the
les gens
city
de la
don't
ville et la
understand
campagne? C'est quoi
anymore?
la chose qui est... enfin, tu dois clairement voir
What
voilà,
are your top three things?
des tendances, de choses
Well,
que voilà,
it's
les
a
gens de
little
la ville
biased
ont
because the
perdu.
people who come to see us
Oui.
meet us on the
Peut-être voilà,
spot.
des choses...
They're people who are
Bon,
interested.
c'est un peu biaisé parce que les gens qui viennent nous
But there are indeed
voir,
people
nous
today who have been
rencontrer,
cut off from
c'est des
nature,
gens
from the
qui
rural
sont
world for one or
déjà
two generations.
intéressés. Mais il y a effectivement aujourd'hui
We're all
gens qui sont
descendants of
coupés,
rural people. There's no
de la nature,
problem,
du monde
but we
rural
have people who are
depuis de
completely
multiples
cut off.
générations.
And it's
On a
quite
beaucoup de
impressive with
descendants
speeches that are
de ruraux, hein,
deconstructed in relation to the
pas de
rules of
problème,
how
mais
nature works.
on a des gens qui sont complètement coupés. Et c'est assez impressionnant avec des discours qui sont
You see it every day in
dire,
communication, death, life.
déconstruits par rapport
It's
aux
something
règles de
almost
fonctionnement de
taboo.
la nature. Vous le voyez tous les jours,
We
hein,
no
dans
longer
la
dare to talk
communication,
about death. Once
la
upon a
mort, la
time,
vie, c'est
our
quelque chose de
ancestors,
presque tabou.
when the grandmother died,
On n'ose plus
the
parler de la mort.
children would also gather around the body of
Pourquoi
that
nos
person.
anciens,
Today,
quand la grand-mère
everything is
mourrait,
hidden.
les
Even our
enfants
elders
allaient
are
aussi
hidden
se
in the
recueillir
wreckage,
autour
and we refuse to die.
de cette personne. Aujourd'hui, tout est caché.
We're going to get them to make
Même
people who are in this
nos aînés sont
philosophy
cachés dans les
understand that
montagnes.
death is part of nature.
Et on refuse la mort. Alors arriver à faire
And that when a hunter takes an animal, it's an animal that would surely die in a worse way.
que la mort fait partie de la nature et que quand
Death is a part of life. It's its term, but it's also a part of life. So it's not at all the kind of thinking that we hear in the rural world where we are.
lesquels il va mourir sous la balle d'un chasseur. Mais non, on a
I'm
l'impression
faced with
que
this kind of
si
thing every day.
on ne prélève pas cet animal, il va vivre indéfiniment.
And we're talking about it, and I'm talking about it a lot.
Totalement d'accord. Hein.
They
Je crois
come
que
in
tu as
quite
partagé
easily.
récemment une vidéo sur X, anciennement Twitter.
Is there any other elements that can be easily disconnected?
Comment était préparé un sanglier?
Absolument, oui, oui. Ça, c'est des choses
When
que
we
les
live
gens
in the
oublient.
city,
Bon, encore
maybe
chez
the
nous,
smells.
petit
Yes,
cochon, hein,
absolutely.
on fait de la charcuterie, donc on a encore ces méthodes traditionnelles qu'on utilise pour faire
To
notre
rework
charcuterie
one's own
sont
aura,
conservateurs.
for example, When one is in nature, one comes too. To rework his hearing, which becomes finer, to find all these natural senses of the human. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's something, in my opinion. Afterwards, we are often put on the index. We are told about tradition.
J'ai pas vraiment réfléchi là-dessus. J'avoue que je suis
What is tradition? In fact, it is knowledge that we are. I don't like the word tradition very much because it leads back to something frozen, whereas in fact, I prefer the word culture. We're in our rural areas with a slightly different culture. When you live in the mountains, 20 kilometers from a bakery or a convenience store, people are very supportive of each other. Tradition, or is it a culture? I ask the question. I think it's more important. And we have human relationships that are completely different. I guess it's easy. And though you correct me, when I think of the hunters, I always think of this hunting, fishing, nature, and tradition party. Yes, which hasn't existed for a long time. Indeed, I think that everything is evolving. Hunting is not based on traditions. Hunting, until the 1960s and 1970s, was organized around. It was a form of picking. The levy was not reasoned, not thought out. Today, it has become management, a fine management, which requires precise data. And then there are populations that didn't exist before. I think things have changed a lot. They will continue to evolve. What it would take is for people to talk to each other. People should talk to each other. It is not easy. There are bugs everywhere among the people who come on vacation, and among the hunters too. So it's not easy to communicate, but we have to exchange. To get to know each other, you have to start by exchanging. When you talk about communication, is it between the hunters and the rest of the world? Between the rural and the rural? The urban and the rural. Urban and rural. I'm fighting a little bit this confrontation that there may be between the urban world and the rural world. You're not urban or rural depending on where you live. In my opinion, we have people who live in the city and who kept this rural culture. In their behavior and their values, in the values they stand for, they have preserved this rural culture. We can very well have urban people who come to live in the countryside, but they come with their urban culture. It's more a matter of culture and values, of priority, knowledge, connection, or disconnection from nature, than place of residence. We have rural urban and urban rural. I'm sorry to say, I don't know if it's clear enough about that. But it's all about culture and values. I think it's extremely clear. I really think there's a lot of thought behind what you're saying. Me, I was in the optical tradition. Thank you for correcting me and our listeners. It's more a matter of culture. Culture is a notion, as you said, that evolves and can be brought into the city. As we can also live in the countryside without having this rural culture. Yes, then I think that, man, there are still developments that are happening in society. There's a certain return, a need to find this nature as well. And that, I feel it strongly. Man, I'm not sure he's made for living in the city. There are people who have adapted perfectly to it, but it's not in our deep nature. What does man seek? Man seeks happiness above all else. So what brings him happiness? Lifestyle is still an essential thing because that's what it's going to do. Whether we live happily or suffer a way of life. so it's not easy to make choices. We don't have the means or the courage to do it. But there are people who come back, live in rural areas in search of happiness. Okay, it's obviously a very interesting topic. So, is happiness defined differently in the city and in the countryside? I don't think so. I think human needs are the same. One thing that's quite striking, though, is stress. As soon as we see people coming who are used to living in the city, they are always in a hurry. Time is important. So, what are we going to do tomorrow? There's a whole organization. How long does it take to get there? Etc. The reckless one does not reason in terms of kilometers. When we say how far away the city was, we always say, it's 30 minutes or 40 minutes. But people take much longer to live. Time to live, time to have relationships. They stop, they argue with each other. They exchange a lot, and that's very important. It's very important because, well, come spend some time on vacation at the Audacity, and then pack your bags, and you'll discover our world of life. I've met people I've exchanged with on social media who came to our house, who told me, Alain, I'm thinking about my friend Serge. I feel like I'm on another planet here, completely on another planet. He said, you talk to each other, you take the time to exchange, to share appetizers, to trade with each other. He gave me the example. He's a Parisian, a pure Parisian, who was born in Paris and lives in Paris permanently. And he was telling me, I sold something on Boncoin a month ago. The person I bought this item from lives 2 blocks from my house. And I offered her to bring it. And she said, no, you're sending it by post. This is blatant. What? It's something that can't exist, that can't be conceived in reality. What? And I don't know, the fear of the other can be and it changes everything in life. It changes everything. Sure. I totally agree. Thank you in any case for reminding us of these values, which can also apply to the city. And that's often forgotten. I totally agree. I think we share a lot of common beliefs. Unfortunately, I don't have the chance to live in the countryside. But the fear of the other is clearly something I see. It's very divisive, and it prevents us from meeting, from exchanging. And to see that in the end, as you said, we're all looking for the same things. So let's work together. After all, I believe that happiness too is knowing how to be content with the essentials. We live in a consumer society that constantly creates needs for us. For it to work, it needs growth. And for growth to exist, you have to sell all the time. You have to create needs. And when you get caught up in that game, I don't think people are happy. They're always, they're always bitter because they haven't had it. They're always looking to own something new. Nature, it reconnects us to the essential. In nature, there is nothing superb. Everything that exists in nature has a utility, unlike what exists in our consumer society today. So to live in nature is also to learn to be content with the essentials and to distinguish between our real needs and the needs that can be created in a consumer society. Speaking of needs, do you observe, I don't know, your tastes change? I have the impression that living in the countryside, you're a little more connected to what you really love.
Totalement d'accord. Ouais, merci en tout cas de nous rappeler ces valeurs qui peuvent.
Do you see your taste in food or nutrition changing? Is it that maybe in winter you're more zucchini and in summer fennel? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Voilà, pas mal de convictions en commun. J'ai malheureusement pas
I
la
think
chance
we're
de vivre en
relearning
campagne,
how
mais
to cook.
voilà, la peur de l'autre,
We're
c'est clairement
relearning
quelque
how
chose
to cook when
que
we
je
live with
vois, hein,
nature
qui est
and we
très
live
divisif
from nature.
et qui
We
nous
have a
empêche
society
voilà,
today
de
where
nous
there are
rencontrer,
very few
d'échanger,
people who
de
actually
pouvoir faire un
cook.
compte, voilà, comme tu as dit, on cherche tous les mêmes choses, donc autant collaborer.
In
Après, je
urban
crois que
areas,
le
it's very
bonheur
difficult,
aussi, c'est savoir
and
se
yet it's
contenter
something very
d'essentiel.
important in life to know how to eat
On vit
well,
dans une
to know the
société de
simplest
consommation
foods
qui a des
possible.
besoins en permanence, parce que pour qu'elle fonctionne, elle a besoin de croissance, pour que la croissance
I am
existe,
fortunate
il
to live
faut
in a
vendre en
municipality where there are
permanence
many
pour
farmers and
créer des
breeders,
besoins.
and they teach me every day
Et
how to cook. For example,
quand
on
on
a
se fait
beef all the
prendre à ce
pieces.
jeu-là, je ne trouve pas que les gens soient heureux, quoi. Ils sont toujours, comment dire, ils sont toujours aigris parce qu'ils n'ont pas eu.
So that's the topic that's important, but
Ils sont toujours à la
maybe
recherche
this could be an
de
opportunity
posséder
for
quelque
you to
chose
do
de
a
beaucoup plus
podcast
beau.
with these farmers. Because
La
frankly,
nature,
they
ça
know
nous
how to explain
décontexte.
to you. How much if you settle for
Elle est
beef ribs
simple.
or ribs?
Voilà.
What do you
Dans la
do with
nature, il n'y a rien
80%
de
of the
super.
carcass?
Tout ce qui existe dans la nature a une utilité, contrairement à ce qui existe dans notre société de consommation aujourd'hui. Donc, vivre dans la nature, c'est apprendre
We've
aussi
forgotten how to make a
à se
fire pole,
contenter de l'essentiel
how to get to
et à
value
faire la
all the other
différence
pieces on an
entre
animal.
nos besoins
And I
réels et
think
les
if we were
besoins
to
qu'on peut se
relearn
créer
that,
dans une société de
first of
consommation.
all, it would be cheaper because we would value the whole carcass. And so the meat
En
would be
parlant
much
de
more
besoins,
accessible.
est-ce que tu observes, je sais pas,
Farmers could
tes
live with
goûts
fewer
changer?
animals.
J'ai l'impression qu'en
They
vivant
can
à la
make a
campagne,
living
on a
with
plus
fewer
reconnecté
animals, which would
à
not
ce
be
qu'on
a
aime
bad thing
vraiment.
for the environment
Et
and for the
est-ce que toi,
planet.
tes goûts en matière de nourriture ou
You
d'alimentation
see, for
changent
example, we're
avec
talking about cooking and how it can
l'hiver qui
influence our daily lives, our
courgettes,
future,
d'été,
the planet.
fenouil, je ne sais pas. Qu'est-ce que tu penses par rapport à ça?
Moi, je pense que on réapprend à cuisiner. On réapprend à
Okay,
cuisiner
that's a
quand on vit
classic topic in this
avec la nature et
podcast.
qu'on vit de la nature.
I know that. It's all the
Dans une société
importance you put on
aujourd'hui,
it,
il y a très peu
but
de
it's
gens qui
very
cuisinent.
important.
Les
So, all these
urbains,
very experienced hunters,
c'est
you
très
know,
difficile. Et
all the
pourtant,
animals
c'est
of your conservative hunters and
quelque
cooks
chose de très
too.
important dans la vie. Savoir bien se nourrir, connaître les aliments,
Yes, it goes
le
with
plus
it, of
simple
course.
possible, avoir. Moi, j'ai la chance de
So,
vivre
what are your
dans
favorite
une
foods, your
commune où il y a
favorite
beaucoup
foods, and the best way to cook
d'agriculteurs
them?
et ils m'apprennent quotidiennement
As
comment
far
on
as
peut
me is
arriver
concerned, honestly,
à
it's
cuisiner, par
greenhouse
exemple,
meat
sur
that
un
I
bœuf,
prefer.
tous les morceaux. Voilà.
Ah ouais.
Alors,
It's a very good
voilà un
meat,
sujet qui est
and it's
important.
very
Et
important in terms
peut-être
of
ce peut être
diet.
l'occasion pour vous de faire un podcast avec ces éleveurs parce que franchement, ils savent
An
vous
example,
expliquer à quel point
a greenhouse is, for 100
si on
grams,
se contente
97
de côtes de
calories.
bœuf ou des entrecôtes,
If you compare it to
pour coûter
beef,
80%
at
de la
100
carcasse.
grams, it's
On a
293 calories.
oublié comment faire un
You
petit
have
peu
zero
de
glucose
compost,
per 100
arriver à
grams of
valoriser
greenhouse and
tous les
about
os qu'on trouve
1.5
sur
grams of
l'élevage.
lipids versus 28
Et
grams on a beef.
je pense que si on réapprenait ça, d'abord, ça serait moins cher parce que on valoriserait la totalité de la carcasse et donc la viande serait beaucoup plus accessible.
It's meat that's
L'éleveur
healthy,
pourrait
meat
vivre
from an
avec
animal
moins
that's lived its
d'animaux,
whole life free and
décéder
hasn't known
moins
animal
d'animaux,
suffering.
ce qui serait pas une mauvaise chose pour le milieu et pour la planète. Et
Because a lot of
voilà,
people confuse
vous voyez,
animal
par exemple,
abuse with
on
killing
parle
an
de
animal.
cuisine et à quel point ça peut avoir, ce que ça peut avoir
Abuse
comme
to me is
influence
not
sur
death. Death is
notre vie
inevitable for
quotidienne,
the
sur notre
animal.
avenir, sur la
Abuse is
planète.
when an animal lives in
Réapprendre à
poor
cuisiner, tout
conditions.
simplement.
It's not respected.
Ok, là c'est
It
un
still
sujet
exists
classique dans ce
less
podcast.
and less
Je sais.
because farmers are
Ok.
increasingly
C'est
aware
toute
of animal
l'importance que vous
welfare
mettez
today.
là-dessus, mais c'est très important.
It still exists, at least in our mountainous
voilà,
regions.
tu es
It is only
chasseur,
extensive
expérimenté,
farming that is
je pense
practiced.
tous les animaux de t'es chasseur conservateur.
Obviously,
et,
we
cuisinier
have to
aussi.
tend towards that.
Ben oui, ça va avec, évidemment.
Du coup,
I'm a
quels
hunter,
sont tes,
and I'm also an
tes
animal
aliments
welfare
préférés,
activist.
tes
It's
aliments
incomprehensible to
préférés, la
some.
meilleure manière de les cuisiner.
I suppose so, but I
Alors,
totally
au
agree.
niveau de la viande, honnêtement,
For me, it's
c'est
obvious, but I
la
understand that
viande
it's
de
a
cerf que je
problem.
préfère. C'est une viande
For me,
qui est,
hunters are the first people to defend nature. That's why I was so happy that the
très
hunters were
bonne et
joining our
qui,
podcast.
au niveau au niveau diététique.
But yes, I quite understand the impossibility for some to understand that.
Un cerf, c'est pour 100 grammes
If
97
anyone
calories.
wants to try to meet us,
97
it's
calories,
with
si vous
pleasure.
comparez à du bœuf,
Actually, before we move on to the end, how do you like to cook deer?
Vous avez 0 glucides sur 100 grammes de cerf et
How do I like to cook deer? The deer already must be preserved. If I shoot an animal that weighs 200 kilos, I won't eat it in a week.
Voilà.
So we're going to have
C'est
to,
important.
well, we use the freezer like everybody else, but less and less. I don't like this way of preserving meat very much. We consume energy. It is silly. I'm looking for older recipes like salt, like canned food. That's it. So I recently put it on Twitter. That's kind of what put us in touch, I think. A recipe from the dried deer angel. That's as old as the world. It's as old as the world. It's very simple to make. It's excellent. It's a way of preserving meat as our ancestors did. There were no freezers back then, and to have enough to eat all year round. Okay, it's clear, it's incredible. So if I remember correctly, it's deer that we put in salt and let dry for 3 weeks. Well, we're talking about deer. We can do it very well with a pork loin. There's no problem. It's a way to preserve the meat. Actually, what I'm doing is I'm taking my deer loin, I'm putting it on for 12 hours. For 12 hours, dipped in thick salt, in the fridge, and there. We have a cooking of the meat that is done by salt. After 12 o'clock, I take my dish out of the fridge. I rinse the meat well because otherwise it's too salty. So you have to remove the excess salt, wipe it well, use it with spices to your liking. A mixture of herbs, a few pounds of pepper, etc. You roll it all up in a bag, tight, put it back in the fridge for at least 15 days. And you have dried lentils that can be eaten all year round. So to stop the drying, because otherwise, if the drying is too long, you're going to have something that's going to be very hard, because we have an animal that doesn't have fat in the meat. So it becomes very hard and uncomfortable to stop the drying. For drying, what I do is I put it under vacuum when I think it's the best drying stage. And there I can eat the animal all year round. Mushrooms are the same. You dry them, you just soak them in water to get very tasty mushrooms that you can use all year round. We treat the nets, the smokers possibly, when we like the taste of the smoke. And all this, it allows you to have your fish, your meat, the vegetables, or the plants that you pick throughout the year, depending on the seasons. It's going to be parsley nettles. We're making nettle soup, which is very good. There are a lot of resources in nature. Nature, I believe, is very generous to the people who know her and who present her. We forgot all that. We have to reconnect. It's important. Thank you for reminding him anyway. So we talked about so many things. We didn't get a chance to talk about mushrooms. I think you were an expert. Oh no, I'm not an expert. I'm limited to a few species I know. But it's important. It's also part of our diet. You know, the deer stew, cabbage sauce. There's not a lot of people out there having a good time. It's clear. That's clear. All right then. Obviously, you're welcome. All right, we're coming to the end of this episode. Do you have any advice for our listeners, for those who are listening to us? I know you've distilled a lot of knowledge and advice. Is there any formal advice to give or repeat at the end of this interview?
Pour arrêter le séchage, ce que je
One
fais, c'est
piece
que
of
je vis
advice
sur
is
l'île.
not to actively judge,
Quand je
perhaps.
juge que c'est
Come to
la
meet the
stade de
people who
séchage.
live in nature.
Et là,
Come
il
to
faut
meet the
sauver toute
farmers.
l'année l'anime. Le champignon, c'est
They say so
pareil.
many stupid things
C'est du
sometimes
séchage,
about their job or the
et
breeders.
de les retremper à l'eau
And
pour
discuss with them.
avoir
Hey,
des
play by
champignons de
what they
très
tell
bon
you
goût qu'on peut
and
utiliser
bring
toute
your
l'année.
own judgment.
Ok.
Les truites, on traite les filets en les fumant éventuellement, quand on aime le goût du fumé.
Obviously, that's the only
Tout ça,
advice
ça
I can give
permet
today, is to learn to
vivre
argue,
sa poisson, sa
to live
viande,
together, and to listen to each other. Unfortunately,
ou les plantes
it's
qu'on
something
ramasse
that's
tout au long de
slowly
l'année, en fonction des
disappearing.
saisons, hein. Ça va être du
So,
pissenlit,
let's be a few to bring it back to
un
life.
peu d'ortie qui est très bonne.
Very well.
Et,
Very well noted.
il y a beaucoup de ressources.
It was Alain Beaud. I thank you
Donc,
infinitely
c'est
for your
des
time,
fois
and I hope to see you soon.
très
See you
généreuse avec
soon,
les gens
Jonathan.
qui la connaissent,
Good
qui
luck
la
for your
connaissent.
adventure. Thank you very
On a
much.
oublié tout
It's
ça.
really good
Il
luck
faut
for
se
your
reconnecter,
adventure.
c'est important.
Thank
Merci
you.
de rappeler, en tout
Dear
cas.
listeners, thank you for being with us today for this special episode of Sharing
Voilà, on a
is
parlé de tellement
Caring.
de choses. On n'a pas eu
We
la
hope
chance
you
de
enjoyed
parler
our
de
conversation
champignons.
with Alain
Oui.
and that
Je sais
you
pas
were
si
able
tu es
to
un
feel
expert.
his passion for nature
Oh non,
and
je
rural
ne
life.
suis pas un expert, je me limite à quelques espèces que
Together,
je connais.
we have discovered how man can live in harmony with his environment
C'est important, ça fait partie
and the
aussi
importance of
de la
reconnecting with
nature.
nature to find a balance in our
Un
lives.
pavé de biche sauce au cèpe, hein. Il n'y a pas grand
We
monde
also
qui
discussed the importance of wildlife management and how,
C'est clair. Ok, bon, bah,
through practices such as approach hunting,
évidemment le bienvenu.
man can contribute to the preservation of our ecosystems. We invite you to think about your own connection with
Très
nature
bien, on arrive à la fin de cet
and to
épisode.
consider ways to
Est-ce que tu
strengthen
auras un
that
conseil à
connection in
donner
your
à nos
daily
auditeurs,
life,
à ceux qui nous écoutent? Je sais
whether
qu'il y a
it's by
aussi
cooking,
énormément de
responsible hunting,
connaissances,
fishing, or just spending
et de
more time
conseils.
outdoors.
Est-ce que peut-être un conseil formel à donner ou
There
à
are many
répéter,
ways to get
pour
closer to our
terminer cet
true
interview?
nature.
Un conseil, c'est
Did you like this
de ne
episode?
pas juger hâtivement. Peut-être.
Don't hesitate to subscribe to
Venez à
our
la rencontre, venez à
podcast,
la
like it,
rencontre des gens
and
qui
leave a
vivent dans la
comment.
nature. Venez à la rencontre des
Your support
agriculteurs.
is essential
Il y
to
a
us
tellement de choses qui
and
sont
helps us share
faciles et
even more
pratiques pour leur
inspiring
métier,
content
des
with
éleveurs.
you. I'm
Et
Blue,
discutez avec
your
eux,
flight attendant,
écoutez-les,
and thank you for
et ne
listening to
jugez
us.
pas avec,
Don't forget to share and take care of each other.
jugez en fonction de ce qu'ils vous disent et apportez votre
See you next time
propre
for more
jugement.
adventures
Voilà, c'est le
on
seul
Sharing is
conseil que je
Caring.
peux donner aujourd'hui, c'est
Farewell, and take care of yourself
apprendre à
and the
discuter,
nature
à vivre
around you.
ensemble et à s'écouter. Malheureusement, c'est quelque chose qui disparaît peu à peu. Donc, soyons quelques-uns à le faire revivre.
Très bien. Bien noté. C'était Alain Beaud. Je te remercie infiniment pour ton temps et j'espère à bientôt.
À bientôt, Jonathan. Bonne chance pour votre aventure.
Merci.
Chers auditeurs, merci d'avoir été avec nous aujourd'hui pour cet épisode spécial de Sharing is Caring. Nous espérons que vous avez apprécié notre conversation avec Alain et que vous avez pu ressentir la passion qui l'anime pour la nature et la vie rurale. Ensemble, nous avons découvert comment l'homme peut vivre en harmonie avec son environnement et l'importance de se reconnecter à la nature pour trouver un équilibre dans notre vie. Nous avons également abordé l'importance de la gestion de la faune sauvage et comment, à travers des pratiques comme la chasse à l'approche, on peut contribuer à la préservation de nos écosystèmes. Nous vous invitons à réfléchir sur votre propre lien avec la nature et à envisager des moyens de renforcer cette connexion dans votre vie quotidienne, que ce soit par la cuisine, la chasse responsable, la pêche ou simplement en passant plus de temps à l'extérieur. Il existe de nombreuses façons de se rapprocher de notre vraie nature. Vous avez aimé cet épisode? N'hésitez pas à vous abonner à notre podcast, à aimer et à laisser un commentaire. Votre soutien est essentiel pour nous et nous aide à partager encore plus de contenu inspirant avec vous. Je suis Bleu, votre hôte et je vous remercie de nous avoir écoutés. N'oubliez pas que partager, c'est prendre soin les uns des autres. À la prochaine pour de nouvelles aventures sur Sharing is Caring. Au revoir et prenez soin de vous et de la nature qui vous entoure.